Today is Sunday, November 13th, 2022. My name is Ezell Wilson, and I am interviewing Ms. Camilla Hall Jackson for the Commemoration and Contextualization Initiative, CCI. We're at the Cristo Rey Preparatory College School here in Houston. Thank you, Mrs. Jackson, for agreeing to do this interview. This interview is being recorded, and the unedited copy will be housed at the Briscoe Center for American History. Please know that if there is anything you do not wish to discuss, I will honor your wishes. If there are topics you wish to discuss and I haven't asked about it, please do bring it up. Lastly, if we need to take a break to get a drink of water or any other reason, just let us know. And so with that, I want to start, begin at the beginning. So let's start with your life growing up and here in Houston. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and your family upbringing?
Okay, thank you, Ezell, for the pre-interview conversations that we've had and for giving me this opportunity. I grew up in Fifth Ward, Texas, and I had three brothers, two older and one younger. My family was always involved, totally involved. My mother was a third-generation Texan. She actually graduated from Prairie View College at that time with a BSRN degree, and my father's from Huddock, Arkansas, by way of Louisiana, came to Houston in 1937. My father bought the house that I grew up in Fifth Ward in 1939 before he married my mother in 1940. And so all I've known is that house in Fifth Ward, which was right 5 blocks from Wheatley, right down the street from St. Elizabeth Hospital. My family was very involved, and my father, when he came to Houston, he joined Antioch Baptist Church, historic Antioch, which is the oldest Black Baptist church in Houston. He became very involved. He was a deacon there. My mother was a chairman of the deaconess board. She was president of the nursing board. My father was very involved, my family totally, in community organizations. My father was a Boy Scout commissioner. He worked at Armco Steel, where he started as a burner, I guess, and he moved up into management at Armco. And he was a member of the Frontiers organization. He was a member of what do they call it? I know, the Business and Professional Men's Organization there. My mother was always involved in community organizations too. She was one of the founders of the Fifth Ward Community Clinic there, right down the street from where we lived. She worked with the Hester House people. As a matter of fact, when she was in her 80s, she would walk to the Hester House to volunteer to give blood pressures to the senior citizens there at the Hester House. And she was a Cub leader, so all the Cub Scouts would come to our house and meet there. We grew up being involved, and we grew up knowing, as a matter of fact, the people in my family and in my church, you were expected to go to college. It was no hearsay, nothing about it. As a matter of fact, the one reason I went to Yates rather than going to Wheatley for high school is that Dr. Caldwell was the superintendent of Sunday school at Yates, and his wife had been my 8th grade English teacher. So I always thought I was going to go to the school, because at that time Dr. Caldwell was the principal of Wheatley. And then when they built the new Yates, they moved him to Yates. So I went to Yates instead of going to Wheatley. But in the first part of the end of my senior year, probably January, February of 1963, I decided that I would go to the University of Texas after I wanted to go to another school, but my parents said I had to go to school and stayed. And my uncle, who was registrar at Prairie View at the time, said that, oh, there's Texas Women's University, and that's University of Texas. So I decided, hey, out of those two, of course, it was University of Texas for me. Not knowing at that time that I had a cousin who had gone to University of Texas in the 1950s. Blossom Davis. And so that became, I went to University of Texas. It was a traumatic experience for me. It was very traumatic because we were sheltered growing up in the 50s and the 60s. You know, I read about everything because my father believed in, even though he had to stop school when he was 12 because his father said that a black man only needed to know how to read, write, and cipher to count, and then he could get by. So he had to get out of school, and he worked at a sawmill. But when he came to Houston and married my mother, he went to evening school at Booker T. Washington, and then he went to Texas Southern because he wanted to make sure that and that was one of the reasons that he joined Antioch, because he said there's a lot of educated people there, and I want to be around educated people. So, but he made sure that we all knew about education and knew about colleges. He took the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, U.S. World and Life magazine, Ebony magazine, Jet, all the magazines we had so that we could read about what was going on in this world. And he wanted to make sure we were well-rounded. We didn't know we could see what black people were doing, and then we could see liberal and conservative white people, because he took U.S. News and World Report, which was a very conservative magazine at that time. So we grew up reading about all the things that happened in the country, and we would discuss it at times. And that's about, well, I could say my mother's family was also full of education. Some of them, you know, my mother had 10 siblings. My mother was the only girl that went to college and finished college. But during the 20s, she and her younger sister and a cousin went to a boarding school in Wolf City, Texas. And it was the boarding school that was organized by Robert Smith. I don't know if you're aware of them, but he had a bank. It was the, if I can think about it, it was Farmers Home Improvement College. That was the name, but it was a high school, basically, but it was called a college. And she stayed there until the early 30s, but her sister who went there with her caught pneumonia and passed away. So she went back home, and then after that, she went to Prairie View to go to college, and that's why she decided to be a nurse, because she wanted to help and to make sure that people didn't pass away from things like, it wasn't pneumonia, she passed away from tuberculosis at that time. And anything else?
Yes, I want to touch on something that you brought up. You said that your parents had you and your siblings kind of reading about what was going on in the world. So in your childhood growing up before you got to UT, were you, how aware were you of the civil rights movement that was happening at the time?
Oh, I was very aware. My father was a member of the NAACP, and he was also, when he first came to Houston before I was born, he was very active in the organization to free the Scottsboro boys, you know, and he always talked about that. My father said that, I need to do some water or something for my throat.
I will pick back up with the last question about just how aware were you prior to going to UT of the civil rights movement at that time?
Oh, very aware. Our whole household. We watched everything on television. We knew about the bombing in Birmingham of the children. We saw Bull Connor with the fire hose on the children. And then, of course, because my father took Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender, we read it all from a black perspective. We regularly had the Jet and the Ebony magazines. So we were very aware of what was going on. And besides that, my mother worked at St. Joseph's Hospital. She started in 1947. Now, St. Joseph Hospital, even though she was an RN there, in the 40s, they did not accept black patients. She talked about being there when there was an accident almost in front of the hospital, and there was a black person involved, and they would not even accept, they could not come into St. Joseph Hospital. So I was very aware of all the racism and all of the problems that were going on in the city. That's why I thought Houston was, I knew that from historically it was part of the South, it was part of the Confederacy, it seceded from the Union, so I really thought I knew about the South being in Houston until I moved to Georgia.
All right, well then I want to touch on another thread that you mentioned, which was the importance of education, not only to your parents, but to your community, including the church community. So I'd like to know a little bit about your education experiences in elementary and high school.
Okay. Well, I went to Atherton Elementary School, which was it's walking distance from my house, and I went to E.O. Smith Junior High, and then, of course, I went to Jack Yates Senior High in 3rd Ward. Now, my mother's family believed in education. She was, although out of the 11 children they had, she was the only girl that went to and finished college. But I think there was more sexism than anything else because all the other girls went to work and everything. She had 2 brothers that were principals at high schools. One was a principal in Hubbard, Texas, in Hill County, and the other was a principal in Midland, Carver High School in Midland, Texas, and then he became registrar at Prairie View. By the time I went to University of Texas, he was registrar at Prairie View. As a matter of fact, 2 of his children joined me at the University of Texas while I was there. And it was a given. It wasn't, the question was, what college are you going to, not if you are going to college in my family.
So given that, how did you come to go to attend University of Texas? What was the process there?
It was sad. It was very sad. I really wanted to go to college out of state. I had visions of going to some college in the East Coast and all of those things. And because at that time, my 2 older brothers had gone to LACC in California, and they stayed with my uncle, though, so that they could pay in-state rates and everything. And my oldest brother ended up going to USC. And so I thought I could go out of state just like they did, but no, my parents didn't say that. So my uncle, who was the registrar at Prairie View, told my parents I should go to an in-state school, and he recommended Texas Women's or University of Texas. And so I got University of Texas. I will tell you, after my first semester, I called home and I wanted to go to any place where there were black students. Spelman, Howard, Hampton, any place where there was some more black students.
Absolutely. So, given that, how you felt about UT upon initially enrolling there, how did your parents feel about you when you first started attending UT or made the decision to go to UT?
Well, really my parents made the decision for me to go to UT. I did not make that decision. They made the decision for me, and they were happy that I was at the university.
So no being able to go back when you call back and everything,
No.
To stay up there. Well, let me ask you this then. Given how you felt about going there, what was your experience there on campus first day? What was your impression when you got to the campus?
Well, I felt that way because let me tell you that we had to send a picture with our application to the University of Texas. And, my thought process then was because in places like San Antonio and Austin and other places, the schools were integrated. Of course, in Houston, they could tell where the black students were by the school they went to. In other places, they could not. Well, they had a picture. so they could see. Because when I got to the University of Texas, for the females, there were two living situations that we had. There was Whitus Dormitory, which was across the street from Littlefield Dormitory, and there was Almetris Co-op, which was right next door to it. The difference being that the dormitory had a maid and a cook. The co-op had a house mother, and all of the participants did their own cleaning up and cooking for themselves. My first year, I stayed in Whitus. They cooked all the food at Littlefield Dormitory across the street and shipped it on a dolly to us. And the cook at Whitus just warmed the food up, and so we had that. And the dormitory and the co-op were right next door to each other. They were two two-story frame buildings.
So once you arrive there and you're situated in the dorms and that sort of thing, what was your experience in the classroom like with your professors and that sort of thing?
Well, the classes were still very large at Texas. So the real negative experience I had was some of the math teachers, and that's my major, were not really too receptive of students of color being there. Some of them didn't even look at us when they taught. They looked the other way, and they did all kinds of things like that.
Yes, I heard that there was even one math professor who was of the opinion that no black student could even earn a high grade in the course too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it not only went to the teachers, it was also the administration. Dean was I'll never forget, was the dean of students, of the girls when I was there. And it so happened that about December, near the end of my freshman year, they decided they were going to close down the only dormitory for black students on campus, for black females on campus, and we'd have to find our housing arrangements on our own. Well, the only other housing for black females that time was Almetris, which was right next door to us, and they had a waiting list, and the dormitories had a waiting list. So we, of course, demonstrated. We found out about it in the Daily Texan. She didn't have the audacity to even come and tell us that they were closing our dormitory. We read about it in the newspaper, the Daily Texan. So, of course, being the 60s, we got together and went over to her office, and we wanted to know what's going on. Why are you closing our dormitory? And she says, well, you can live in any of these other dormitories, when in reality, what they had done at the mid-semester is they had taken 2 black students from Whitus and put them in Kinsolving with 500 other girls, and they had to room with each other, and said they integrated the dormitories.
So then, my understanding was that there was a protest about what had happened at Kinsolving.
Yes.
Were you at all involved with that?
Oh, yes, every protest. Yes, I was involved.
So student activism on campus during your time there, would you like to relate some of the issues that were the topic of the protest?
Yeah, it was during the 60s, so of course we were very aware of everything. Number one, there was the housing. That was a big issue. And then there were businesses that were on the drag, which is a central place, that did not serve black people. One of the biggest things I remembered, I was talking to Rodney about this earlier, was we demonstrated against this gas station which wouldn't serve gas to black people. And we were demonstrating and somebody came up and says, hey, the police are coming. You better call somebody and see if they'll get you out of jail. And of course, I went to make the phone call, and they came through and arrested some people. And Rodney Griffin was one of the people who was arrested, he said. But all I know is that luckily I was calling to see if I could get someone to get me out of jail if I went.
So, in addition to the activism that you and fellow black students at UT were involved in, what were some other aspects of social life involving black students there at UT?
Well, most of the social life was in the black fraternal organizations. They had 2 black sororities and a black fraternity on campus, and the black fraternity, the Alphas, had a house. And then there was the Black Student Association, and while I was there, and I don't know, I think it wasn't my freshman year, but I think by my sophomore year, in the student center, they had what they call the black room. And so we'd go in the black room, and during that time, they also had stump speaking. And around in some area around the student center, people could get on a stump and speak about anything. And the thing that comes to my mind is one time the black students, of course, were talking about all the problems on campus and everything. And this white student said that we should be happy that they brought us out of Africa into civilization where there were lights and running water. And of course, we laughed him out of there. There wasn't lights and running water when you came to the States. But you know, University of Texas has always been known as a bed of conservatism. So of course, that was true during those times as well.
So would you say that your membership in the sorority was a place where you found some degree of comfort and support during your tenure at UT?
Yes, it was the sorority, and because we were segregated, our houses became a place for comfort. Because like after I left the Whitus, after they made Whitus into a co-op, and since there was a waiting list, unless you were on the list, you were not likely to live. There were a few people from Whitus who stayed there, not too many. I did move to Almitra's co-op, and most of the black students would just migrate over to Almitra's co-op, where our house mother was Miss Almitra's Durham, and any black student couldn't go hungry on campus because she would feed you. If you came there and told her you needed some food, she would give you food. If you needed anything else, she would make sure that you got it. So we had that support system, and then we kind of migrated together to support each other.
Okay, and that's wonderful too, to have that system on campus. Now, off campus in the city of Austin itself, were there any places where you felt comfortable, or you felt any sort of support? Were there any connections made with any residents in the city of Austin?
Well, I did have some relatives who lived in the city of Austin, so I had some connections there. And then my best girlfriend from Houston went to Houston-Tillotson, so we would go over to Houston-Tillotson regularly. And the girls, this is as an aside, Houston-Tillotson being a Christian HBCU, I had a curfew of like sundown. I mean, it was 7 o'clock, and that curfew was early. And so we would have joy going over there, going to the boys' dorm, waving to the girls who were in their dormitory. It had to be, because they were past curfew, past their curfew time. So we did do that. And then, of course, we participated in some of the churches that, like David's Chapel, I think is the church that I went to in Austin, that was in East Austin. Now, you do understand, in Austin at that time, The campus was in West Austin, across the interregional. Most of the black people lived in East Austin. Of course, it's different now because the campus has gone over to East Austin and gotten that land, but so you had to go to East Austin to see black people generally.
Yeah, that had been my experience. Even when I went to Austin a few times in the early 2000s, that it seemed like a significant portion of the black community in Austin were on the east side. So that still seemed to be the same. So the black room, because the other two interviews that I did also talked about the black room, and so I am curious to know your perception of the black room and your experiences there.
It was like a safe place on campus where the black students could congregate together and we could exchange any problems we were having, any ideas we wanted to, talk about professors, and there might be a way to get along, talk about who not to get for certain courses, who were the racists on campus, and all of those things.
Excellent. And so, with that sense of support within the on-campus organizations like the fraternities and sororities and the black room, and the activities on campus in terms of protests and that sort of thing, was there any involvement in terms of the activism that you were a part of that was off campus?
Well, yes. Now, and this still goes to my sorority. My grad advisor was Wilhelmina Delco, who ran for school board while I was there. So, of course, we all participated in her election and her candidacy and everything else. So we were actively involved in the school board race there in Austin to support of our sorority sister.
Now, did you work at all during your time as a student at UT?
Not as a student, but right after I graduated, I worked. Now, you have to understand, when I went to UT, tuition was $50 a semester. So, no, I did not work.
I certainly wish it could have been that way for you of age. When I was good.
I mean, even though that was a lot for my parents at that time because they had two other children, but still, it was so that I had no loans or anything.
So then, about graduation, by the way, too, did your parents or any of your family attend graduation?
No, I did not attend graduation. No, I didn't attend graduation. I got my degree, but I didn't attend graduation.
Was there a specific reason why?
I didn't want to. To be perfectly honest, my experience at University of Texas was a very negative experience. I did not begin to feel positive about Texas until maybe 15 years ago. And, then I started having it was great to have finished from Texas because, but I still remembered I had a lot of negative feelings. One of the feelings arranged for, you talk about demonstrations, I thought about in the 60s, probably 66, we demonstrated against, we went to the Darryl Rawls' office to find out why there were no blacks on the Texas football team. Another activism point, we had to buy an activity pass and we could go to the football games, but we only went to the football games when they played non-conference. So they had teams that had other black people on them. We sat on their side. We took our own snacks in and cheered for the opposing team as part of our, demonstration for that. Now, when we went to Darryl Rawls' office, the first thing he told us was that we didn't have any black football players in the state of Texas. And so we said, oh no, there are these people at Oklahoma and Ohio State and everyone who came from Texas and they're doing wonderful. And then he told us, well, they recruit players based on character. So, that was a very negative experience. Recruit players based on character. And at that time, one of their outstanding players was Tommy Nobis, and he had no character at all.
Yes, I fully understood. So then, with those challenges that you were facing, okay, so there were challenges definitely you were facing because of the racism there at UT. I'm curious to know if you faced any challenges or pushback being a woman involved in math at that time.
I really didn't. Not that I was aware of, let me tell you that. Because the only negative comments that I got, as really our sorority really got it, was from Dean Dean. She actually questioned why we had so many members who were getting degrees in math, because most of the students there had degrees in either math or other courses or the STEM group, and she questioned that because that was not true of other sororities on campus. And I'll tell you another thing about talking about sororities. They had, in the Panhellenic organization, they invited us to become associate members. Now, they didn't have anything like associate members before that. Somebody told them they should invite the little darkies to become members of the Panhellenic organization. So they made up this thing called associate members, and they said in order to become a full member, you have to have 25 members and a house. The year I pledged, which was 65, we pledged, I think there were 13 people on our line, so we got close to 25. We got about 24 members in our chapter, and we said, oh, we can get a house. We can become full members. Well, then they changed the rules. Now, our graduate chapter wanted us to become associate members. We did not want to become associate members, because we were either full or none, is what we said.
So how did it end up?
I think we became associate members because, the people who graduate chapter had had the pull. We did not.
So for your experiences at UT, do you feel that UT academically prepared you for the world of work and everything that you went into right after graduation?
I do. I do feel that it academically prepared me. Because, when I look back, that was not only did it academically prepare me, when people saw that I finished from the University of Texas, I got a certain status in applying for jobs and things that other people did not get. And I've really realized that when I was developing systems in human resources, people, employment, when they look at things, they say it doesn't matter, but where is your degree from, the status of it, it did.
And so your first job coming out of UT was?
IBM Systems Engineer.
And in working these programming and tech positions, did you ever come across, other UT alums?
Yes, I did. In Austin, of course, I had some UT alums because what I was as a systems engineer was like technical sales support, because I supported the salespeople. When they would make a sale, then I would go in and give the company the technical support for the product. Now, In Austin, I did experience a lot of racism also. As a matter, the Austin office was a GEM office, Government Education Medical. So our customers were in those three areas. I went to and then they had a small business area. I went to one of the small businesses. Now, usually in the government and education, though, the racism was kind of subdued. They weren't blatant with it. But this small business I went to, I went in and gave him my card and told him I'm your IBM technical systems engineer, here to support in whatever you want. He looked at the card and he went like over there to the phone, standing so I could see him and hear him. Called the office. Did you send this girl here? Is what he asked. And luckily, the manager at that time says, yes, we sent you a systems engineer, and that's who you will work with.
Wow. So then you go, now is it from Austin on to Albany, Georgia next? Or is that
No, I came back. I came to Houston, and I worked for a number of energy companies, Tengasco was the name of the company. It was a Tenneco oil company that they called Tengasco, Tennessee Gas Pipeline. I worked there, and I worked for the Houston Chronicle first, and then there.
So in your years since graduating, have you kept in contact with any of the acquaintances and friends that you made while you were attending?
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt, but your hand is in the shot sometime. Oh, thank you.
So, that can make the blooper reel. So in the years since you graduated UT, have you kept up with any of your former friends and acquaintances from the years that you attended?
Yes, I have. A few of them I have.
And was this through organizations or just kind of through personal contact through the years?
Well, through either personal contact and organizations.
So what organizations had you been a part of that allowed you to kind of stay in touch with your UT connections?
Well, of course, my sorority is one in which, because as in the room there were probably about 3 or 4 people who were in the same chapter I was in at UT, and then I'm sure yesterday you had some of the people who were in my chapter at UT, and then I have kept in contact with some through the NAACP, the Houston Urban League, and then of course with social media. Being on social media, I've been in contact with some of them. Like I always keep in touch with Rodney because he's always doing stuff. On social media, he lets you know everything he's doing.
So in the years since your graduation, have you been back to the UT campus? And if so, what was that experience?
I did. I have gone back probably about 3 times for organized things.
I'll pick back up with the last question about remaining in contact with those who you knew back during your time at UT. And well, actually, I'm sorry, we'll go back to the actual last question I asked, which was, what were your experiences like when you went back to UT's campus?
The first time I went back really as a campus, because I had gone through the campus and visited and taken people things, but the first time I went back officially was in, I think about 2006, when the chapter, my sorority chapter, had celebrated their 50th anniversary, and they invited the alum to come to the chapter, and they met us at our cars. They were very gracious. We had all kinds of fellowshipping opportunities. and we took pictures. It was a great experience. The next time I went back was after they had started the Precursors, and at the Precursor Homecoming, or whatever it was they called it then, I went back for that. And that was when I started to begin feeling better about being an alum of Texas. And that time they gave us tickets to a football game, we had dinner, we had all kinds of things. And they honored the original Precursors. I think from '56 was the first year that black students attended in numbers in undergraduate, because graduate John Chase had been there in '52. Because they only allowed graduates, black graduates at Texas first.
So, yeah, and yes, and how aware were you, speaking of the kind of the start of integrating these universities, and I know you were still quite young then when the case happened, but were you and your family aware of the Sweat versus Painter case that began
Yes.
to integrate these schools?
Yes, as a little girl, I could read about it in the paper. And then, one of the first graduates in graduate school, John Chase, was a member of the church I attended, so I knew John Chase and his family.
And Brown v. Board of Education, I suppose, would have been right after, shortly after Sweat. So were you all aware?
Yes, yes, I was aware of that, and they had a case in Houston to integrate the Houston schools, and one of the plaintiffs in that case lived about 3 blocks from me on the same street I did in Fifth Ward, Beneva Williams.
So, given all that had to happen there in the 50s and 60s for integration and for the expansion of educational choices, and given what you've said about your family background, I'm curious to know what then is the role, what is the significance of education as you see it in your life post UT?
Well, I see education as being very significant. It's like our foreparents saw education as a way to climb the ladder, as a way to show that they were just as good as anyone else. And I can say that they said it was implanted in us. You have to get a degree. Knowledge can't be taken from you. They might want to take anything else and everything else from you, but they can't take knowledge from you. So I was always encouraged to obtain as much knowledge as possible.
Well, on a more personal note, the other two interviewees that I interviewed had met their spouses while at UT. Was that the case for you?
Yes, my first husband I met while at UT. Yes, I did.
Are there any stories about that you'd like to share about that experience at UT?
Well, my first husband was an activist at UT, so he was very involved in all of the demonstrations that were going on, and that's kind of where I met him. He was an activist, and he encouraged all of the sorority girls to say, you can't just be in a sorority, you got to be involved in what's going on. So we were very actively involved in everything that was going on campus also.
Now, you mentioned connections with some of the students at Houston-Tillotson, and in terms of social interactions. Were any of you students at UT who were involved in activism involved in any sort of joint effort with some of the students from other campuses?
No. It was, I think it might have been a intentional divide there because some of the students at Houston Tillotson thought we were better than them because we went to primarily white institutions. So, so therefore, but people who we had ongoing friendships with before we got to college, we had relationships with them, and we would encourage things because my junior year I moved off campus and lived in an apartment, and that's another story. An apartment in West Austin was hard for a black person to get. Actually, we had to encourage them to rent an apartment to us. There were just 4 apartments on the side of a male dormitory, and then there was another group of apartments there. And my roommates, there were 3 of us, and I, and Arlene Lawson, who was here earlier today, and her roommate. We wanted 2 of the apartments there, and they did not really want to rent to us. We had to go get my friend Mickey Leland, who was in Austin at that time, to encourage them to rent us apartments. And that didn't really do that much good, because after we got in our apartments, there were times when, being females there, the white guys in the neighboring apartment decided that they would harass us. So we came to our apartment one day, and all these guys, my apartment was on the 2nd floor, all these guys were standing by our apartment. And so we said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "Oh, you don't want us here?" "No, we don't want you here." We called the Austin police, and an hour and a half, 2 hours later, by the time they arrived, they told us that these guys were just having fun.
So no support from sort of the local force there in Austin?
None. Can you imagine if any black students had been having fun in an apartment where there were white females? It would have been another Emmett Till.
Yes, and it's stunning that you knew Mickey Leland too. Yes.
He grew up a block from me. I mean, it's a small world in Fifth Ward, and I went to school with his younger brother Gaston, and he went to school with my older brother Willie at Texas Southern. They were all pharmacy majors there. So yes, we were.
One of my previous interview subjects talked about Dr. King coming to campus at UT in the 60s, as well as, of course, toward the late 60s, Kwame Ture, and I think even Angela Davis. During your time there on the UT campus, were there any intersections like that with the sort of the larger civil rights movement that was happening?
No, not that I can remember. I don't remember any of. No, I don't remember any of those icons.
Yes, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And were there any sort of I suppose talk amongst the student body with respect to say the Vietnam War, because I know that was something that was being protested.
Yes, there was. Oh, we also, being the 60s, besides civil rights, there were the hippies who were demonstrating, who would join us in our demonstration, and some of us would join in their demonstrations. So there were a lot of demonstrations on the Vietnam War. And then while I was there, that was the time when Lyndon Johnson was president. And so, yeah.
Yes, and were you there? Were you there during the year of the the shooting at the tower?
That was during a summer. I think I was there, but I wasn't on campus because I think it was during the summer.
Yeah. So, taking a step back and kind of looking at the stretch of your career post UT, and you said UT had aided you academically in preparation for those things. Are when you reflect on your legacy as a UT student, as in one of the early black students there, as a precursor, what do you think of your attendance there and it opening doors for generations of black students to attend UT after you?
Well, I think it did open doors because especially because we were rather vocal, made it easier for additional black students to come in. And we saw when they integrated the dormitories, when they integrated businesses on the drag, when they integrated a lot of different things, then it became easier for black students to come. And then there were a lot of black students who lived in the city of Austin who would only come to campus for class and then go back home, like they were in school. Well, they began to feel more comfortable hanging around the campus area and being there more on campus. My family has more of a relationship because I had a cousin who went to Texas in '55. I wasn't even aware of it when I was there until later. She was from Lockhart, Texas. She went to Texas for a year, and then, since then, while I was there, I had two first cousins that were there from Midland, Texas, and their children went there, and I had other cousins to go there. So now I have a number of family members who have gone to the University of Texas.
So I want to ask here then, circling back around to attendance there as a student and in class, right? And I had asked about professors before. I'm curious to know what were your interactions with your classmates?
Very little. Very little. And, because it's 60s. Texas was still very, very, very segregated. Now, there was more interaction with the campus organizations. There were people who were members of organizations like the Spooks, which I would never be a member of. But my roommate was a member of the Spooks. It was a service organization. It was basically white, and they would every year invite a couple of black students to join them. So they had more interaction. And then I was also in the university chorus, where, there were a few of us in there. But we basically migrated to each other because we didn't know the rest of the students. And our interaction with the females tended to be sometimes very negative because they would be more interested in things about our boyfriends and how was their sexual prowess and stuff like that,
Wow. So then, wow, that's stunning that they would feel so bold to ask things like that.
Yes.
Wow. I wasn't expecting that. So, but it does bring to mind something else too that a couple of the other interviewees had mentioned too, because you had mentioned integrating the dorms and that sort of thing. There had been mention in previous interviews I've done about the situation with athletics at UT. Do you have any stories about that?
Well, besides the Darrell Royal deal where he told us they recruited based on moral character and everything, uh, most of well, they actually, the men actually had an intramural football team, and they played with other kinds of things in their groups that they did. The female, we didn't do very much in athletics. As a matter of fact, we went to football games. I don't think we went, I never went to a basketball game there. They didn't have any black players on any of the teams. Now, there was a walk-on track athlete, I think James Means was a walk-on, walked on the track team while we were there. And so we did, oh yes, an interesting story about track. Texas Relays is always in April, big thing. The Texas Relays are really big. Nobody really was concerned with us on the Texas Relays until they were having a reception, and most of the stars from the other teams were black. All of a sudden, we get a call from Dean at our sorority house inviting us to come to this party they're having for the Texas Relay participants. And then once we get there, we see what the deal is.
So if I'm presuming correctly, they're asking you to come and like socialize with the athletes. Now, was this in part because they didn't feel like they wanted to socialize with these athletes?
In part, they wanted some black girls there to associate with the black athletes. Because they didn't want those black athletes associated with their white females.
Understood. So with athletic situation being what it was, right, with predominantly or entirely white teams, was there a decided push to get more black athletes there to UT?
Not on the football team. Darrell Royal only got black athletes to come when his alumni whatever said, hey, he needed to get some. Because they were being beat by other teams that had black athletes.
So then with that then, what was the black student body's position on the black student body itself at UT and the numbers of black students there? All of you were the precursors, you were among the first, but my understanding is you were still a rather small group.
Compared to the rest of the campus, we really were. And we did not know what our numbers were because, the students on campus, we knew each other if we lived on campus, but there were a lot of students that lived in the city that would come in and they would come to class and go back. We didn't know them unless a few of them would probably socialize. And once the black room was developed, more people would hang out in the black room and we got to know more students from the city. But our numbers were, I guess the first place we really socialized was in Almetris Co-op, when we would hang out there and do things, and then in the black room.
So once you start seeing more and more of your fellow students through these social interactions, is there a notion that perhaps there should be more students at UT, or was anyone considering the angle of how many students there were?
We didn't organize anything to discuss that. Not that I'm aware of. Let me put it that way.
So when you did graduate and moved on to your career and all of that, have there been any particular highlights of your career that you would like to mention?
Yeah, I think the biggest highlight was when I decided to accept a job as a senior program analyst with Automated Sciences Group in Albany, Georgia. And notice I said Albany, guess how they pronounce it. I was in Albany. But the Tengasco, they were having layoffs, and 6 months after I left, they did lay off people all in the field, in the department I was in. And I accepted the job as a senior programmer analyst, and it was an 8A firm. And when I went there, I said, what do you mean? What kind of 8A firm is this? Because I only saw white people in the company. And he said it was a black-owned company, but because they were in Albany, Georgia, they had to have a certain face. So, but my claim to fame was I moved up from senior programmer analyst to technical director of the firm there in Albany. So I helped them to get additional blacks to come into the firm because there was Albany State University, which was an HBCU right there in the city. And so we could recruit from there. And then there were former Marines who had retired from technology who were in Albany, or who would stay if they had a job there. So
then would you say, to follow up on that throughout your career, you've been active about seeking better representation in the positions where you've worked?
yeah, I have attempted to do that. But it's difficult at times. I had a black man tell me at the Houston Chronicle that I took his job. A non-degreed person who was there came to my office when I was promoted to manager over HR systems, because they didn't have any, that I took his job. I said, what about all these white people? What did they take?
So were there ever any concerns like that within the community itself and in Austin while you were a student there? As student activists, did you receive any degree of pushback from the local community there in Austin, in East Austin?
Not really, because from what we could see, our involvement, and we would go to East Austin frequently, as a matter of fact, so that we could socialize with other people of color. And it was a mixed bag. Some people were glad, and very accepting of us there, and others thought that, we came to look down upon them because we went to the university, and that's what they called UT there in Austin, the university.
So, is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you would like to talk about? Any particular stories you'd like to share, whether it's time at UT or after?
No, I think we've covered just about everything that I think that's an important highlight.
Well, let me ask you this: did your daughters ever consider following in your footsteps to go to UT?
They didn't want to. They didn't want. I was in Albany when my daughters graduated from high school in Albany, Georgia. My oldest daughter wanted to go to an HBCU, so she went to Central State in Wilberforce, Ohio, and she thoroughly enjoyed it there. My youngest daughter went to Sarah Lawrence and said, but after graduating from Sarah Lawrence, after a few years, she did go to grad school at the University of Texas.
Thank you. And I was a bit amazed because we went through all of the questions so what felt like so quickly. I'm actually not sure how long we've been in here, but again, if there are any sort of last comments or memories that you'd like to share.
No, I think I've covered most of them. I think it was good, and I'm glad I came here to reminisce with some of my classmates that I hadn't seen in ages and ages and ages, and then to, of course, see one of not even a classmate, Donna Blacksher, and I don't know what she was doing here, because I don't think she's a precursor, but I tutored her in math. She was one of my neighbors. I know she works for NASA now, but I was her math tutor when I was a student at the University of Texas, and she was in high school.
Absolutely. So do you think that being involved in the precursors has impacted sort of your retrospection about your time at UT?
Well, it has. It really has. It put a positive spin on what I had always considered a negative experience. And now I can support the Texas football team, basketball team. I can really cheer for them, when in the past I could not.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time and speaking to me and sharing your stories of your time at UT. Once again, I find myself learning quite a lot about not only sort of these firsthand experiences of integration and what that was like, but just kind of learning the similarities as well as the differences between, you know, the undergrad experience then versus my time as undergrad. You know, of course, I went to U of H at PWI too, and so I do find some kinship in some of the stories that you're telling. So I do appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this project too, and I'm grateful for your position as being someone who did by going to school, even if you didn't want to go, you sort of laid down the groundwork and opened up some doors for people who came later. So thank you so much for that. And so
Yes.
with that, I think that's the conclusion of the interview. So I suppose.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.